Let's learn our next rules. Our next rule, rule number 2, is about our X-intercepts. Our X-intercepts will happen when the numerator is set equal to 0. So if you remember in the last video, we looked at the denominator for the domain. We're going to look at the numerator for the X-intercept. So we're going to practice this rule down here with these examples. Let's find the X-intercept of this one. X-intercept, we set the numerator, x plus 1, equal to 0, and solve. And I get x equals negative 1. Now, X-intercepts are always graphed as points, which means I need to write them as a point. So X-intercepts are always the point, comma, 0. That's how we write them. So let's try B. Set our numerator equal to 0, and I get negative 3. Make sure you write it as a point, negative 3, comma 0. And if we look at C, we set the numerator equal to 0, and we go, wait a minute. That does not make sense. Negative 2 does not equal 0. That doesn't make any sense at all. So because I tried to set it equal to 0 and it doesn't make sense, we actually say none. This graph will not have any x-intercepts, meaning the graph of this equation will never cross the x-axis. So that is how we find our x-intercepts. We look at the numerator, set the numerator equal to 0, and write it as a point. Rule number 3 is our y-intercepts. So for our y-intercepts, we're going to set the x's equal to 0 and simplify. So basically, this is saying we're going to plug 0 in and simplify, see what we get. So rule number 2, x-intercepts, look at the numerator, set it equal to 0. Rule number 3, for the y-intercepts, plug 0 in and see what you get. So let's do these examples again, but with our y-intercepts. So I'm going to plug 0 in for our y-intercepts. So I get 0 plus 1, 0 squared minus 9. And if I simplify that, I get negative 1/9. Now, same as x-intercepts, y-intercepts are also always graphed as a point, which means we always need to write them as a point. And y-intercepts are always written as 0, comma, the number. That's how we write them out. So there's the number I got, and that's how I write it. So let's try B. Plug 0 in. 0 plus 3 over 0 squared plus 9 simplifies to 3/9 or 1/3. Write that as our y-intercepts, 0, comma, 1/3. And C. Plug 0 in. Get 0 squared minus 9. That gives me negative 2 over negative 9, which is 2/9. Write that as a point. And that's how we do our y-intercepts. Now, before I end this video, so we can move on to our next rule, one last thing we should mention about x-intercepts. If you remember back in chapter 2, we talked about multiplicity of x-intercepts. And if that multiplicity is even, right here, if it's even, that means I'm going to bounce off of the x-intercept. And if the multiplicity is odd, that means I'm going to cross through the x-intercept. Well, since we're graphing again, that is still going to help us graph here. So anytime you do an x-intercept, you should also say if it's even or odd. And that's based off of the multiplicity, which is the exponent of the factor. So if we look at A, the factor I started with was x plus 1. If I think of the exponent on that factor is raised to a secret 1. So the exponent on that factor is a 1, which is an odd number. So this is going to be an odd x-intercept, meaning I'm going to cross through this point at negative 1. If I do that at B, I started with an x plus 3. That also has a secret 1 exponent. 1 is odd, so this is also going to be an odd x-intercept, meaning we'll cross through that point. Now, if this x plus 3 had been, say, squared, then we would have said that the exponent on the x plus 3 is 2, which is even, so we would have bounced off of that point. So anytime you do an x-intercept, you should get used to putting even or odd underneath it, so we know if that x-intercept bounces off or crosses through. So that is it for our next two rules, x-intercepts and y-intercepts. A little summary. X-intercepts, set the numerator equal to 0, solve, write it as a point, and don't forget to do even or odd based on the multiplicity or the exponent on the factor. Y-intercepts, plug 0 in, and don't forget to write it as a 0.0, that number. So that is rules 2 and 3. In the next video, we'll talk about the next rule, which is vertical asymptote.